Human fists slammed against cryo tubes, smashing free. They were finally home. But Earth was not how they left it. Commander Edward Turner's eyes snapped open as icy cryo fluid drained from his pod. Blinking away the fog of 500,000 years of cryosleep, he stumbled out onto the gleaming deck of the UES Odyssey. The ship's AI, Ares, spoke up. Edward clenched his jaw. Damn it all. 500,000 years ago, the once mighty human empire had sent the Odyssey on a deep space mission. And now look what happened. He was supposed to be humanity's vanguard, securing new worlds. Instead, he'd left Earth defenseless. He had to make this right. Ares, wake the crew, all 200. Last time I checked, we had 200 of the finest human soldiers and scientists aboard. We're taking our planet back, Edward ordered, as he pulled on his command uniform, the fabric sliding over his battle-hardened muscles. Edward strode onto the bridge. Through the viewscreen loomed the blue marble of Earth, tarnished by alien towers stabbing into orbit. His crew started filing in, rubbing sleep from their eyes, looking to him. He pulled up a display. Listen up. This is Earth. The aliens down there, the Vidians, they took it from us, from humanity. We're the last of our kind now, the last hope. Our mission is simple. We retake our homeworld or die trying. No retreat. No surrender. Grim faces nodded back at Edward. They all knew the stakes, same as him. Humanity would not go quietly into the night. Then proximity alarms blared. Edward whirled to the viewscreen. A massive alien warship was rising from the planet to greet them, weapons hot. Attention humans, this is Keed of the Vidian Empire. Earth is ours. Surrender and your lives may be spared. A harsh alien voice burst over comms. Edward glared at the hideous insectoid alien glaring back over the vidlink. Like hell he'd surrender. Humanity will never abandon Earth. This is our home, Vidian. We're taking it back, no matter the cost. You Xenos have a choice. Fight us and die, or run. Mandibles clicked as Keed laughed. Then you will be destroyed. The Odyssey continued repairs in Earth's orbit. Charred hull plates were cut away and replaced. Damaged power conduits were spliced. In the hangar bay, Edward zipped up his combat armor. He had to see what the Vidians had done to humanity's homeworld. "Ripper, Ghost with me," he called out. Lieutenant Jack Hansen, close-quarters combat expert, and Sergeant Ethan Lee, recon specialist, jogged over. "We're going planetside for intel." The three men boarded a cloaked dropship. Engaging thrusters and slipping past Vidian ships, they descended through the atmosphere. They landed in the cracked streets of an ancient human city. Skyscrapers lay crumbled, vehicles were rusted out. Nature had started to reclaim it all. Creeping through rubble and vegetation, they saw signs of Vidian presence everywhere. Alien structures, organic and moist, had been grafted to human ruins. Vidian soldiers marched on patrols, insectoid armor gleaming. Humanity's home had been invaded. "Let's get a closer look." Edward led them to the walls. Hansen placed a breaching charge. With a muffled whump, a hole was blown open. They slipped inside, past startled Vidian guards. Gunshots rang out. Hot green blood splashed the halls. They found their way to a control room. Lee accessed a terminal, his fingers flying over keys. "I'm in their systems, downloading data now." "Jesus, these bugs have been on Earth for centuries. Reshaping it, wiping out humans and—" Lee paused, swallowing. "They're experimenting on people, using them for their fucking biology, dissecting them." Edward clenched his rifle tighter. Red rage flashed through him. "Those monsters, will make them pay, every last one." Alarms blared. The bunker shook. Shouts in Vidian language echoed. They'd been discovered. A storm of plasma bolts scoured the control room. Edward and his men returned fire. Vidian bodies crumpled, but a lucky shot took Hansen in the gut. He collapsed, bleeding. "Rippers hit." Lee dragged Hansen into cover, but more Vidians were pouring in. They were about to be overwhelmed. Edward cursed, hating himself, but they had to get the intel out, had to complete the mission. "Leave me," Hansen gasped out, shoving his rifle into Lee's hands. "Get out of here, that's an order." Edward met his subordinate's pain-filled eyes, loyal to the end. "I'm sorry." Laying down covering fire, he and Lee ran for the exit. Plasma sizzled past. Vidian shouts chased them. They leapt into the dropship and rocketed into the sky, leaving Hansen behind. Edward slammed a fist against the bulkhead, roaring in grief and anger. Lee sat in stunned silence, staring at Hansen's rifle. They returned to the Odyssey with vital data, but one less friend. One step closer to liberating Earth. In his stronghold, Warlord Keed reviewed reports of the command center attack. The humans would suffer for challenging him. This time, there would be no escape. In the bowels of the Odyssey, Edward huddled with his officers over a holographic display. Data streams from the captured Vidian command center flowed across the screen. Dr. Petrov, the ship's brilliant scientist, stabbed a finger at a pulsing red icon. "There, Commander. The Vidian's weakness. A central power core deep beneath the surface. It's the beating heart that keeps their colonies and defenses running." Edward leaned in, eyes narrowing. "So we rip that heart out?" "Precisely," Petrov nodded. "Destroy the core and we cripple their occupation of Earth." "I like it." Edward straightened, jaw set. "Petrov, Sergeant Lee, you're with me. We'll infiltrate the core, plant charges, blow it to hell. Lee, your stealth expertise will get us in. Petrov, we'll need your technical skills to bypass security." The men nodded grimly, checking weapons and gear. Edward was about to issue more orders when alarms blared. He sprinted to the bridge, Lee and Petrov on his heels. On the view screen, a swarm of Vidian warships was bearing down on them, weapons hot. "Keed," Edward snarled. The alien commander's hideous visage filled the screen, mandibles clacking. "Did you think you could strike my forces without retribution, human? I will tear your ship apart bolt by bolt," Keed roared. Edward clenched armrests as the Vidian fleet opened fire, the Odyssey bucking under the onslaught. He itched to lead the strike on the power core himself, but his place was here, defending his ship. He met Lee and Petrov's eyes. On the planet's surface, Lee and Petrov crept through the shadows of a Vidian installation. Towering reactors hummed around them. Petrov consulted a scanner. "The central core is 200 meters ahead, but I'm detecting heavy security." Lee hefted his rifle. "Just get me close." They pushed forward, hugging walls. Vidian guards patrolled catwalks overhead. Lee hand-signaled Petrov to halt. He unslung a silenced sniper rifle, peering through the scope. In quick succession, he dropped the guards with neat headshots. Green blood sprayed. "Move," Lee hissed. They sprinted past twitching corpses. The power core loomed before them, a massive sphere crackling with energy. Petrov moved to a control panel, fingers flying over keys. "Bypassing fail-safes, overriding containment protocols, and we're in. Plant the charges." Lee knelt, unspooling Decord. He placed explosive packs at critical structural points. Petrov glanced at the readout, sweat beading his brow. "Charges armed? We have 10 minutes until—" A guttural roar shook the chamber. A hulking form crashed down before them. Vidian, but none like they'd seen before. Muscles bulged beneath chitinous armor. Implants studded its skull, eyes blazing red. "Damn," Lee breathed. "Looks like the bugs have been experimenting on themselves too." The abomination lunged, moving with terrifying speed for its size. Lee rolled away, gunfire sparking off its armored hide. Petrov scrambled for cover, consulting his scanner. "Its nervous system is regulated by cybernetic implants. If I can hack the control signal—" "Whatever you're gonna do, Doc, do it fast," Lee yelled, ducking a sweeping claw. Petrov typed furiously, muttering equations. The monstrosity bore down on Lee, shrugging off his shots. It raised a massive fist and froze, eyes flickering. It spasmed, implants shorting out. Then it whirled, barreling into a squad of Vidian guards rushing into the chamber. "Move now," Petrov yelled. He and Lee sprinted for the exit. Behind them, the abomination tore its former masters apart in a spray of ichor. Alarms howled. They leapt into a service lift, rocketing upward. The lift shuddered as a deep boom echoed from below. The power core detonated, the explosion rippling outward, shattering the foundations of the Vidian colony. Lee and Petrov burst from the lift, diving into their waiting ship. The craft lurched into the sky as the ground crumbled beneath it. On the Odyssey's bridge, Edward watched as the Vidian fleet reeled, ship suddenly powerless as the core died. He slammed a fist on his armrest. All batteries fire at will. Target their critical systems. The human ship's guns roared, lances of plasma and missiles raking the enemy. Vidian hulls buckled, atmosphere venting from breaches. Kaid's flagship listed, engines flickering. "This isn't over, human," the warlord snarled over the comm. "You have won nothing." "We'll see about that, Roach," Edward grinned ferally. "All ships pursue and destroy." But Kaid's ship lurched away, his fleet limping after it. Edward watched them go, eyes hard. Lee and Petrov stumbled onto the bridge, armor scorched. "Well done," Edward nodded. He turned to the view screen, watching the wrecked Vidian ships fleeing. It was a major victory, but he knew the war had only begun. They would take back Earth, whatever it took. With the Vidian power core destroyed, the Odyssey's crew moved fast. Edward led teams down to secure a defensible position. They dug into the bones of an old human military base, its walls of reinforced concrete still standing amongst collapsed skyscrapers. Soldiers welded salvaged metal plates over holes, mounted gun turrets, and tapped the base's backup reactors. Edward watched his people work, an ember of hope kindling. They had a foothold. Now to dig in their heels and push back. He turned to Sergeant Ethan Lee. "Take a squad and scout the area. We need intel on what's out there." Lee nodded. "Yes, sir." He gathered men and rolled out in armored rovers. They picked through vine-tangled ruins, sweeping for threats. In a crumbled parking garage, Lee held up a fist. Voices echoed from the shadows. He thumbed his rifle's safety off. A woman's voice called out, "Don't shoot, we're human." Lee blinked. He'd expected Vidians, humans. "Come out slowly, hands up." Figures emerged into the light, blinking. Lee stared. Men, women, children, a couple dozen. Dirty and gaunt, but human. His grip tightened. They couldn't be the only ones. Back at base, Edward hurried to meet the rovers. Lee jumped out and saluted. "Commander, we found survivors. They've been living underground." "I'm Evelyn Novak. We've kept the old ways alive, waiting for the day our people would return. You've waited centuries for this day. I'm Commander Edward Turner of the UES Odyssey. We're here to take our world back." He clasped her weathered hand. "If there are other survivors, we'll find them. You're not alone anymore." Evelyn smiled sadly. "I have a granddaughter, Alicia. Brilliant girl. She studied those roach bastards' tech for years, thought of ways to beat them." Edward's eyes widened. "I need to meet her immediately." Soon he sat across from the young scientist. Dr. Alicia Novak, barely 30, and already so vital to their fight. She brushed a strand of dark hair from intelligent eyes. "I've been researching their biological augmentations. I believe I can create a counter-agent to neutralize their enhancements mid-battle." Edward leaned forward. "Doctor, this could change everything. I want you on my team." Alicia took a breath. The weight of humanity's hopes settled on her shoulders. "I'm in." As the humans bolstered their forces with Alicia's knowledge, Warlord Kaid seethed in his stronghold. He would not be humiliated again. His soldiers hauled struggling humans into labs. Their screams echoed as Vidian geneticists probed and spliced. This time, the humans would be broken. Kaid met with the Ascendant, leader of a Vidian faction even more ruthless than his own. Cybernetic implants studded her carapace. "The human infestation must be scoured," she clicked. "We will bring the Empire's full might to bear." Kaid inclined his head. "Our alliance will see the human threat cleansed forever." In the human base, soldiers snapped to attention as Edward strode into the command center. Alicia and Petrov hunched over a workstation, a tangle of wires and components scattered before them. Alicia held up a boxy device. A neural disruptor. It should wreak havoc on Vidian cybernetics. Her face was drawn. But we'll need to test it. Alarms blared. Red lights strobed. Edward sprinted to the sensor console. Report! Massive Vidian force incoming. Keed's really throwing the kitchen sink at us, an operator called. Edward slammed a fist on the console. He turned to Alicia and Petrov. Looks like your toy's getting a field test. Better work fast. He keyed the base intercom. Battle stations, this is it, people. Soldiers scrambled to walls and towers. Edward and Alicia raced outside. The sky darkened with alien ships. Vidian drop pods smashed down, disgorging hulking soldiers. Their carapaces bristled with implants. They surged toward human lines, plasma scything. Edward raised the disruptor, teeth bared. He thumbed the trigger. The device hummed, waves of energy pulsing out. Vidians twitched, implants sparking. Their movements turned jerky, spastic. Edward barked a laugh. It's working. Alicia sighted down her pistol. Focus fire on the big ones. Bullets and energy beams hammered the enemy. Smoking holes punctured Vidian armor. Soldiers toppled, but more always came. A familiar roar shook the ground. Cade lumbered through the chaos, eyes flaring crimson. He fixed on Edward with pure hate. Edward shouldered through the melee. Soldiers clashed around them, screams and gunfire filling the air. He raised the disruptor. Cade shrugged off the neural attack, implants surging with power. The warlord lunged, claws extended. Edward rolled under the swipe. His rifle barked. Rounds sparked off chitin. Cade backhanded him across the jaw. Edward spat blood. The disruptor skittered away. Both rivals scrambled for it. Edward scooped it up. Cade slammed into him. They grappled, crashing through rubble. The disruptor dug into Edward's ribs. He gritted his teeth and jammed it against Cade's skull. Energy crackled. Cade screeched, convulsing. Edward battered the warlord with his rifle. Chitin cracked. Viscous yellow blood splashed. Cade collapsed, breath rattling. Edward raised his gun. This is for Earth, you son of a bitch. He pulled the trigger. Thunder boomed. Cade jerked, ichor spraying, his eyes dimmed. Edward staggered upright, Cade's blood dripping from his face. He looked out over the battle, chest heaving. Vidians fled before the human onslaught, their mightiest champion fallen. The cost had been high, too high. Edward's eyes stung, but they had done it. They had struck the blow that would begin humanity's liberation. The stench of death hung heavy over the ruined base. Edward limped through piles of broken Vidian corpses, blood oozing from a dozen wounds. His team staggered behind him, battered but still on their feet. Dr. Novak clutched her pistol in shaking hands, eyes haunted. They had struck the bugs a heavy blow today. Cade was dead. His repulsive form sprawled in the rubble. But the Vidian Empire was a hydra, cut off one head, two more took its place. Reports already crackled over the radio of the remaining warlords turning on each other, clashing for dominance even as their soldiers died around them. Edward gathered his people in the shadow of a crumbled guard tower. "Listen up," he growled. "Those roaches are at each other's throats now. It's the opening we need to hit them where it hurts." He tapped a portable holoprojector. A flickering blue image of a towering structure shimmered to life, all harsh angles and organic curves. "Intel says the Vidian leadership is meeting here to sort out the mess we made. I say we crash the party." Sergeant Lee checked the charge on his rifle. "A frontal assault? That's a meat grinder waiting to happen." "We don't have the manpower for a stand-up fight," Edward agreed, "but we've got an edge." He jerked a thumb over his shoulder. A hulking figure ducked through the rubble to join them. Muscles bulged beneath patchwork armor, thick limbs laced with glowing circuitry. Dr. Novak sucked in a breath. "Axel." The cyborg inclined his head. His voice was a rumble of thunder. "Vidian machine, human heart, built to break our enemy." Edward clasped the giant's arm. "Glad to have you on board, big guy. We're going to need every ounce of that strength today." He turned back to the team, eyes hard. "Gear up and move out in 5. It's time to cut the head off the snake." The ruined city swallowed them, jagged teeth of shattered buildings looming on all sides. Eerie silence pressed down, broken only by the crunch of rubble beneath their boots. Edward signaled a halt, fist raised. Something was watching them from the shadows. Inhuman screeches pierced the air. Vidian soldiers burst from cover, weapons spitting green fire. The humans dove for shelter, returning fire. Pulse rounds stitched the aliens' carapaces. Ichor sprayed. But more came, skittering over walls, leaping from windows. A tide of chitin and plasma. Edward barked orders, directing fire. The team was good, damned good, but the Vidians seemed endless. A roar shook the street. Axel charged from cover, massive cannon cycling. He waded into the aliens, servos whining, armor spitting sparks as plasma splashed against it. One massive fist lashed out, crumpling a warrior's skull. Another swing shattered a soldier's spine across his knee. At last they reached their target, a squat bunker bristling with antennae and gun emplacements. Axel ripped the blast door from its hinges, tossing it aside like a cracker box. Edward led the charge inside, rifle thundering. Vidian guards fell, ichor splattering consoles and screens. Edward slammed a warrior against a bulkhead, ramming his blade up under its chin. Dr. Novak put a burst through a soldier's compound eyes. Sergeant Lee broke a spindly neck with a sickening crack. They fought their way to the central chamber, a vast domed space filled with holographic displays. Insectoid figures shimmered around a circular table, arguing in hissing cliques. Edward recognized their faces from intelligence reports. The Vidian leadership, the ones pulling the strings. He raised his rifle to end their miserable lives. A monster fell upon them, a nightmarish fusion of human and Vidian, all grasping claws and gnashing fangs. Tubes pulsed beneath translucent skin, pumping glowing fluids. It moved with terrifying speed, faster than anything that size should. It smashed Axel aside, hurling him through a bulkhead. Sergeant Lee emptied a clip into its back. The rounds puckered its flesh, then popped out, wounds sealing with a hiss. It lashed out, sending him crashing into a sparking console. Dr. Novak screamed. The beast lifted her by the throat, compound eyes blazing. Edward bellowed in rage, firing until his rifle clicked dry. The thing shrugged off the hits, ichor leaking down mottled skin. Axel dragged himself from the wreckage, servos grinding, blue coolant leaking from a dozen rents. He slammed into the creature, knocking it away from Novak. The two titans crashed together, trading blows that cracked the deck. Edward pulled Novak to cover. She coughed, clutching her bruised throat. "It's a Reaver," she croaked. "Bioweapon, spliced genes, Vidian cruelty given flesh." In the center of the room, man and monster tore at each other, smashing through equipment. Axel's armor shattered, revealing the meat and metal beneath. The Reaver's hide split, ichor spraying, but it fought on, fangs snapping, talons ripping. Dr. Novak's eyes darted over the thing's heaving form, desperately seeking a weakness. There, a pulsing mass at the base of its skull, an exposed knot of tissue and tubing. She grabbed Edward's arm, pointing. He nodded grimly. Together they raised their weapons, aiming for that crucial weak point. The beast loomed over Axel's broken body, fangs dripping. Edward screamed a war cry and opened fire. Pulse rounds and plasma bolts tore into the mass of flesh. The Reaver shrieked, black fluid geysering from its skull. It spasmed, clawing at the air, then crashed to the deck, ichor pooling around its twitching bulk. Tears tracked through the grime on Edward's face. "Yeah, big guy, we won thanks to you." Edward bowed his head. Axel had given everything for their cause, for humanity's future. He wouldn't be forgotten. The team limped from the bunker, herding shell-shocked Vidian leaders. They had struck a critical blow today, cutting out the enemy's heart. But Edward knew it was far from over. Dr. Novak pulled him aside, eyes haunted. "I hacked their systems during the fighting. I found—" She swallowed. "The Reavers we saw. That was just a taste. The Vidians have been working with a rogue faction, one even worse than Cade's brood. They're making more of them, dozens, hundreds." "An army of abominations," Edward growled, "to scour us from the earth. We have to stop them, or there won't be a future left to save. Edward gripped his rifle, knuckles white. The battle for humanity's homeworld had only begun. With the fate of Earth hanging in the balance, Edward rallied his team for their most critical mission yet. Dr. Novak's analysis of the intelligence revealed the rogue faction's terrifying plan: a hidden research facility deep in the Amazon rainforest, churning out an army of bioweapons. Edward hailed the Odyssey. "Ares, we need a lock on that facility. Feed us coordinates and any tactical data you can gather." "Affirmative, Commander," the AI responded. "Scans indicate heavy defenses and a large contingent of Vidian soldiers. I recommend a coordinated assault, ground team to infiltrate, Odyssey to provide air support." Edward nodded, mind racing. "Agreed. Keep the skies clear and enemy reinforcements at bay. We'll handle the rest." He turned to his team, eyes hard. "Gear up and be ready to move in 10. We're taking the fight to them." The strike team assembled in the hangar bay, checking weapons and equipment. Sergeant Lee, jungle warfare expert, hefted a machete. "Gonna be tough going down there, sir. 500 millennia of evolution, who knows what we'll find." "Nothing we can't handle, Ghost," Edward clasped his shoulder. "You get us through, we'll do the rest." Edward slotted a power cell into his rifle. "Then that's what we'll do." The dropship knifed through the atmosphere, plunging into a sea of green. The jungle had swallowed the world, an endless expanse of trees and twisting vines. They set down in a clearing, the team emerging warily. It wasn't long before they encountered the jungle's new masters. A swarm of insects descended, each the size of a dog, iridescent carapaces gleaming. Venomous stingers dripped, mandibles snapping. Plasma fire lit the gloom, scything through the swarm. Bugs burst like blisters, ichor sizzling on armor. But always more came, a living tide of chitin and hunger. Lee hacked through a wall of vines, clearing a path. They pushed on, past luminous fungi and pitcher plants large enough to swallow a man. Time lost all meaning beneath that green hell. Edward raised a fist, halting the team. He keyed his comm. "Odyssey, we're in position. Light 'em up." Lances of plasma rained from the sky, scattering the defenders. Explosions blossomed, flames licking at the structure. The turrets swiveled, tracking the new threat. "Go now," Edward roared. The team charged, darting through the smoke and chaos. Vidian soldiers rallied, plasma screeching past. Edward and his soldiers returned fire, rifles bucking. Chitin cracked, ichor spraying. A hulking figure emerged from the facility, armor gleaming, forearms clenched, each bearing a crackling energy blade. Eyes blazed beneath a helmet of bone. "Zek," Edward snarled. "Novak, get to the control room. We'll handle this." The scientist nodded, sprinting for the entrance. Edward and Lee spread out, rifles hammering. Zek shrugged off the hits, advancing with terrifying speed. His blades sang, parrying shots, carving glowing arcs. Edward ducked a slash, feeling the heat of it sear his face. He rammed his rifle butt into Zek's chest, staggering him. Lee leapt, machete flashing. A blade split the air, nearly gutting him. They traded blows, moving like quicksilver. Edward took a slash across the ribs, armor sizzling. He gritted his teeth, slamming a fist into Zek's helm. Bone cracked. An inhuman roar shook the complex. The bioweapons, driven mad with rage. Zek laughed, a scraping metallic sound. "You're too late, human. The horde rises." Shapes burst from the facility, all tooth and claw. They fell on human and Vidian alike, tearing with abandon. Screams filled the air, viscera splattering the ground. Edward saw Lee go down, a bioweapon fastened to his throat. He surged forward, ripping it free, stomping it to pulp. Lee gurgled, blood pulsing between his fingers. A pulse of energy rippled out, the device activating. The bioweapons spasmed, control implants shorting out. They fell, twitching and drooling. Zek howled in rage, renewing his assault. His blades hammered Edward's armor, sparks cascading. Edward met him blow for blow, steel and flesh colliding. Above, the Odyssey registered the bioweapons release. Ari spoke, calm and cold. "Activating precision orbital strike. Danger close. Evacuate immediately." Edward slammed Zek back, servos whining in his armor. "Novak, Lee, we're out of time." They ran, leaping over the fallen, dashing for the dropship. Plasma rained around them, Vidian soldiers giving chase. Behind, Zek roared in fury. The ground bucked, explosions marching closer. The Odyssey's strike erasing the facility from existence. They hurled themselves into the dropship, engines screaming. The shockwave caught them, slamming the craft into the sky. Edward clung to the harness, teeth rattling. The complex vanished in a maelstrom of fire and debris, bioweapons and soldiers alike consumed. Silence fell, broken only by the dropship's labored breathing. They had done it. The threat was ended. But at what cost? Lee slumped, blood pooling beneath him. Novak bent over him, hands shaking. Edward closed his eyes, exhaustion and grief warring within. The comm crackled, Ares' voice echoing. "Commander, we have a situation. A Vidian fleet just entered orbit, larger than anything we've seen. They're heading right for us." Edward's heart raced as Ares' words echoed in his ears. A Vidian fleet, larger than anything they'd seen. The rogue faction's final gambit. He slammed a fist on the console. "Bring it up on screen." The view screen flickered to life, filled with the menacing shapes of Vidian warships, dozens of them bristling with weapons. The crew fell silent, the enormity of the threat sinking in. Edward paced, mind whirling. A frontal assault would be suicide. The Odyssey was powerful, but against those numbers... His eyes fell on Dr. Novak, hunched over her workstation, the disruption devices glowing softly. A desperate idea took shape. "The Trojan horse," he muttered. Louder, "We have a captured Vidian ship in the hangar, yes?" Sergeant Lee nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, been studying it, trying to crack their systems." "Good. Here's the plan. We load that ship with Novak's devices, sneak it right into the heart of their fleet. Then we blow those devices, sow some chaos." Edward's eyes gleamed. "The Odyssey stays hidden behind the moon till the time is right. Then we hit them while they're scrambling." Novak looked up, determination etched on her face. "I'll need to modify the devices for remote detonation. Give me an hour." Edward clasped her shoulder. "Do it, Lee, prep your best men. Looks like we're taking a little trip." The hangar buzzed with activity as the infiltration team made ready. Engineers swarmed over the boxy Vidian ship, prepping it for flight. Novak and her team hurried aboard, devices in hand. Edward and Lee oversaw the loading of weapons and gear. Time was short. At last the ship was ready. Edward settled into the command chair, Lee at the helm. The rest of the strike team strapped in, grim-faced. Novak hovered over the device controls, lips moving silently. Edward keyed the comm. "Odyssey, this is Alpha 1. We're green for launch. Stay out of sight till you get Novak's signal." "Understood, Alpha 1. Good hunting. Odyssey out." Edward nodded to Lee. "Take us out, Sergeant. Nice and easy." The Vidian ship, engines thrumming, slipped from the hangar. It angled toward the looming fleet, a minnow among sharks. Every breath caught as they approached, waiting for the challenge, the alarm. But none came. The behemoth ships hung silently, still as death. They were in. Edward allowed himself a tight smile. So far, so good. "Bring us in, Lee. Novak, get ready." The ship wove through the Vidian formation, every sensor straining for signs of detection. Lee guided them toward the flagship, a monstrous dreadnought bristling with enough firepower to glass a continent. As they drew near, a hail crackled over comms. "Vidian ship. Transmit clearance codes immediately or be destroyed." Lee shot Edward a look. This was it, moment of truth. Edward nodded grimly. "Transmit codes." A tense beat. The codes, painstakingly reconstructed from captured data, scrolled across the screen. Edward's heart pounded. If this didn't work... "Codes accepted. You are cleared to dock." A collective exhalation. They were through. The flagship loomed before them, a steel mountain. Lee angled them toward a yawning hangar bay. Docking clamps reached out, latching on with a shudder. "We're in," Lee reported, hands dancing over the controls. sealing the ship. Nods all around. They knew what was at stake. The ship's ramp hissed open. Edward and Lee crept out, hugging the shadows. The hangar was cavernous, filled with the angular shapes of Vidian fighters. Insectoid technicians scurried to and fro, antennae twitching. They moved quickly, placing the devices at key structural points Novak had identified. So far, no alarm. Edward started to breathe easier. Maybe they'd pull this off after all. Then the shouts started. Vidian soldiers poured into the hangar, weapons raised. Pulse fire stitched the air. Edward cursed, diving for cover. So much for quick and quiet. He and Lee returned fire, rifles bucking. Vidians fell, ichor spraying. But more always came, a tide of chitin and hate. They were badly outnumbered. It was going to be a bloodbath. "Lee," Edward shouted over the din, "get back to the ship, Novak, blow the devices." On the ship, Novak's hands flew over the controls. Sweat beaded her brow. Almost there. A bone-shaking boom rocked the ship. The devices! Edward whooped in savage joy. Damage alarms wailed, Vidian voices screeching. The flagship shuddered, lights flickering. Edward sprinted up the ramp, diving inside. Lee slammed the controls, engines roaring to life. The ship tore free of the clamps, hull groaning. Vidian soldiers poured fire after them, but they were already racing away. In their wake, explosions blossomed across the flagship, secondary blasts rippling through its frame. On the bridge, Admiral Thrak howled in rage, mandibles clacking. The humans, miserable vermin! His claws stabbed at the controls, trying to bring weapons to bear, but systems crashed, screens flickering with gibberish. They'd been sabotaged. Beyond the viewport, Thrak saw the human ship fleeing, weaving through the disarrayed Vidian fleet. Blast it! He'd skin them alive for this insult. The flagship wallowed, belching gouts of flame. Thrak clung to the sparking command chair, eyes burning with hate. Proximity alerts blared, a new contact emerging from behind the moon. Thrak stared in disbelief. The human dreadnought, weapons hot and coming in fast. On the Odyssey's bridge, Ares calmly recited firing solutions. The Vidian fleet hung before them, milling in confusion. Plumes of debris drifted from their flagship. Edward's gambit had worked. "All batteries, fire at will," Edward barked from the infiltrator ship. "Hit them with everything we've got." The Odyssey's guns roared, lances of plasma and missiles reaching out. Vidian ships shattered, atmosphere and shards of chitin spraying into the void. The Odyssey wove through the chaos, Edward's tactical orders guiding each shot, each evasive course. On the flagship, Thrak watched his fleet come apart. Consoles exploded around him, fires raging. He slammed a fist down, ichor leaking from a dozen cuts. No, it couldn't end like this. He would have the human's head for this outrage. That damned commander always one step ahead. Thrak would carve Edward's heart out himself. He seized the controls of his personal shuttle, powering up the engines. If his ship was doomed, he would take the humans with him. The shuttle burst from the flagship's hangar, racing toward the infiltrator ship. Pulse cannons hammered at the smaller ship's shields. Thrak roared in dark pleasure. He would crush them like the insects they were. Edward saw the shuttle coming, spitting fire. Thrak. It had to be. One last mad gamble by a desperate foe. He bared his teeth in a feral grin. "Novak, Lee, get to the escape pods. I'll deal with our friend." He keyed the ship-to-ship comm. "Ours, give me a firing solution on that shuttle. Let's swat this bug." But Thrak was too fast, too nimble. The infiltrator's guns couldn't track him. Edward growled in frustration. They were running out of options. Thrak's voice crackled over the comm, thick with hate. "Commander, I will burn your ship to ashes. I will flay your crew alive. And I will mount your head on my—" Edward shut off the comm with a snarl. To hell with this. If guns wouldn't do the job. He stabbed at the controls. The infiltrator lurched forward, engines howling, straight at Thrak's shuttle. The Vidian admiral's eyes widened. What was this madman doing? He wrenched at the controls, desperate to evade. Too late. The ships collided with a bone-jarring crash. Metal screamed, bulkheads crumpling. The infiltrator's frame buckled, airlocks bursting. Atmosphere vented in plumes, the ship spinning away, fires raging in its hull. Edward clung to the juddering helm, blood sheeting down his face. Proximity alarms shrieked, the shuttle looming in the cracked viewports. He reached for the comm, coughing on smoke. "Harry's lock-on transporters, get me over there." The AI's calm voice filtered through the chaos. "Commander, I must advise against this course of—" A shimmer of light, a gut-wrenching lurch. Edward materialized on the shuttle's blood-slicked deck. Thrax staggered from the helm, a long gash leaking ichor down his carapace. The Admiral's compound eyes fixed on Edward, mandibles clacking in rage. "You," Thrax hissed, "you've ruined everything." He lunged, power-assisted limbs uncoiling. Edward rolled aside, snatching up a jagged spar of metal. No guns. This would be settled the old way. They crashed together, a whirlwind of fists and stabbing metal. Thrax's chitinous plates cracked under the human's blows. Edward's flesh parted in ribbons beneath razor claws. Blood and ichor splashed the deck, the opponents grappling across the sparking ruin of the shuttle. Edward rammed his knee into Thrax's thorax, ichor spraying from ruptured breathing tubes. The Admiral staggered back, a claw clamped over the wound. Edward pressed his advantage, the spar a whistling blur. Chitin splintered, the metal sinking deep into Thrax's flesh. The Vidian convulsed, black fluid gushing from his maw. Edward wrenched the spar free, raising it high. Thrax's eyes widened, glazing with agony and mortal terror. Edward brought the metal down like an executioner's axe. Again, until the deck was awash in ichor and shattered chitin, until the thing that had been Thrax twitched and was still. Edward sagged against the bulkhead, bloody froth on his lips. Ribs broken, concussion, bleeding internally. It didn't matter. He fumbled for his comm, vision greying at the edges. "Sir, get me home." Light engulfed him, the atom-scattered tingle of the transporter beam. The shuttle dissolved, replaced by the strobe-lit smoke of the Odyssey's battle-scarred bridge. Edward crumpled to the deck, a spreading pool of crimson beneath him. He looked up through fading eyes, saw the Vidian fleet breaking apart, fighters and destroyers corkscrewing into the void, smashed and burning. Cheers over the comm, the crew's elation muted and distant. They'd done it. The Vidian menace broken, Earth saved. His vision tunneled, darkness rising up. It was over. He could rest now. Through the grey haze, gentle hands lifted him, voices calling his name. Dr. Novak, haggard but alive. Sergeant Lee, bleeding from a dozen cuts. The lights of the med bay, the sting of a hypospray. No, not over. Not yet. He pushed away the darkness, dragging himself back to the pain, the light. Earth was free, but there was still work to do, still a threat out among the stars, waiting, hungering. The Vidian rogue faction was still out there. They would regroup, rebuild, return, and Edward would be there to meet them, for Earth, for humanity. Until his last breath, he would fight. He reached out, clasping the hands of his crew, his friends. They were with him to the end, as they always had been. Edward smiled through bloodied lips. The battle was won, but the war went on. The Odyssey limped back to Earth, scorched and battered but victorious. Edward stood on the bridge, bloodied and bruised, as cheers erupted from the human survivors below. They had struck a blow against the Vidians that would be remembered for generations. But the celebration was cut short by an urgent transmission from the ship's sensors. Aris's calm voice filled the bridge. "Commander, we've detected a hidden Vidian facility beneath the surface of Mars. It appears to be the source of their bioweapons research." Edward's jaw clenched. They couldn't afford to rest, not with this threat looming. "Prep a stealth ship, we're going in." He assembled his team, Sergeant Lee, his ever-reliable shadow, and Lieutenant Hansen, recently recovered from his wounds. They boarded the sleek craft, still nursing their own injuries, but determined to see this through. As they approached Mars, the red planet looming before them, alarms blared. A Vidian defense fleet, hidden from the Odyssey's sensors by the planet's magnetic field, bore down on them. Edward gripped the controls. "Hold on!" He sent the ship diving into Mars canyons, weaving through the labyrinthine rock formations. Plasma bolts sizzled past, the Vidian ships in hot pursuit. Edward gritted his teeth, pulling maneuvers that pushed the craft to its limits. They managed to lose their pursuers in the twisting canyons, setting down near a hidden entrance to the facility. Edward led the way, rifle at the ready. They crept through dark, organic-looking corridors, the air thick with the stench of chemicals and decay. What they found inside was a nightmare given form. Rows of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing twisted, malformed creatures, the results of the Vidians' experiments. Hansen recoiled, disgust etched on his face. My God, what have they done? Further in, they discovered holding cells filled with emaciated humans, their bodies bearing the scars of countless experiments. Lee's knuckles whitened on his rifle. "We need to get them out of here." Edward nodded grimly. "We will, but first we make sure the Vidians can never use this place again." They planted explosives at key structural points, working quickly and efficiently. As they prepared to leave, a voice rang out, cold and imperious. Vidian stepped from the shadows, his exoskeleton gleaming with implants. Edward recognized him from intelligence reports. Dr. Zorax, the twisted genius behind the bioweapons program. Zorax spread his arms as if welcoming them. "You humans, always so short-sighted. Can't you see the potential in what we're doing here?" Zorax laughed, a grating metallic sound. "A monster. No, I am a visionary. These creatures, these bioweapons as you call them, are the future, the perfect melding of flesh and technology." He gestured to the stasis pods. "Imagine it, Commander. An army of soldiers that never tire, never question orders, capable of adapting to any threat. With them under my control, the Vidian Empire will be unstoppable." Edward's finger tightened on the trigger. "Control, is that what you call this? Twisting life to fit your own sick desires?" "Sick desires?" Zorax's mandibles clicked in agitation. "I am trying to perfect life itself, to elevate it beyond the constraints of evolution, and if a few lesser species must be sacrificed along the way, so be it." "Lesser species?" Edward snarled. "You mean the people you've tortured and experimented on? The ones you see as nothing more than test subjects?" "For they should be honored to be part of something greater than themselves," Zorax said dismissively. "Their sacrifices will pave the way for a new era of Vidian supremacy." Edward had heard enough. He opened fire, his team joining in, but Zorax was fast, his implants granting him inhuman speed and reflexes. He dodged the hail of bullets, lashing out with augmented limbs. Hansen went down, a deep gash across his chest. Lee pulled him to cover, firing one-handed. Edward and Zorax circled each other, trading blows and shots. "You cannot stop progress, Commander," Zorax roared, his exoskeleton sparking from the damage. "The future belongs to the Vidian Empire." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Edward growled. He feinted left, then lunged right, tackling Zorax to the ground. They grappled, enhanced strength against human determination. Edward managed to get his hands around Zorax's throat, squeezing with all his might. Zorax thrashed, his implants firing wildly, but Edward held on. With a sickening crunch, the Vidian's neck snapped. Edward rolled off him, breathing hard. Lee helped Hansen to his feet, the wound already clotting thanks to his enhanced physiology. "We need to go, sir. Those charges are set to blow." Edward nodded, taking one last look at Zorax's broken form. "Let's move." They raced through the corridors, alarms blaring, the countdown ticking in their ears. They burst from the facility just as the first explosions ripped through the structure. The ground heaved, throwing them to the dirt as fire and debris erupted into the thin Martian atmosphere. Edward watched the flames consume the twisted heart of the Vidian war machine, a grim satisfaction filling him. But Zorax's final words echoed in his mind, a chilling promise. "You think this is over, Commander?" the scientist had hissed, even as the life faded from his eyes. This is only the beginning. Even now my creations are seeded across your precious earth, waiting to be awakened. You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. Edward's fists clenched. Zorax was right. This fight was just beginning, and he would be there to meet it for as long as it took. For Earth, for humanity. Until his last breath, he would fight. Edward's thoughts raced as he and his team hurtled back to Earth aboard the Odyssey, Dr. Zorax's chilling revelation echoing in his mind. Hidden bioweapons, seeded across the planet, waiting to be unleashed. They had to find them, fast. The Odyssey's sensors burned hot, scanning every inch of the globe as Edward pored over the data they'd seized from the Mars facility. There had to be a pattern, a clue to the locations of Zorax's caches. Days turned into weeks as they crisscrossed the planet, striking at every lead. Vidian holdouts fought them every step of the way, fanatics determined to guard their master's work. Edward and his soldiers met them with fire and steel, leaving shattered bunkers and burning wreckage in their wake. But always there were more facilities, more abominations to destroy. Edward pushed his team to the brink, snatching fitful sleep in the Odyssey's bunks between raids. They were all exhausted, stretched to the breaking point, but they couldn't stop. Not with what was at stake. A month into the grueling campaign, they hit a Vidian data center in the heart of the Amazon. As Sergeant Lee pulled files from the shattered computers, a message flickered to life on the screens. Edward's blood ran cold as Dr. Zorax's visage leered out at them. "Commander Turner," the Vidian scientist hissed, mandibles twitching. "You've been busy, chasing scraps across the globe, but you haven't found my true masterpiece, have you?" Edward clenched his jaw, knuckles white on his rifle. Zorax laughed, a rasping, clicking sound. "One more facility, Commander. One more chance to stop me. Find it if you can, but hurry, my ultimate creation hungers. And when I unleash it, your precious Earth will be nothing more than a feast for my perfect being." The message cut out, leaving mocking laughter echoing in the bunker. Edward slammed a fist into the console, mind racing. One more facility, one last chance. He drove his team harder than ever, barely pausing for rest. The Odyssey's scanners probed every depth, analyzed every scrap of data, and finally, deep beneath the ruins of an ancient city, they found it. Zorax's sanctum. Edward led the assault himself, desperation fueling his steps. They carved through the Vidian defenses, a tide of human fury no force could stop. Deeper and deeper they pushed, into the very heart of the facility. And there, in a cavernous chamber pulsing with obscene light, they found Zorax. But not the Zorax they knew. The scientist had remade himself, flesh melded with the twisted products of his experiments. He was a thing of shuddering meat and grasping claws, pulsing with malevolent power. Edward raised his rifle, teeth bared. "Your future ends here, you sick bastard." They clashed in the heart of the facility, soldier against abomination. Zorax was monstrously strong, shrugging off wounds that would have felled a lesser being. His claws raked Edward's armor, his hideous bulk smashing through walls and equipment. But Edward fought with the strength of desperation, the fury of a man with everything to lose. He matched Zorax blow for blow, his rifle blazing, his fists hammering dented chitin. The battle raged through the facility, two titans locked in mortal struggle. The very walls shook with the force of their conflict, debris raining down around them. Edward's team fought to keep up, battling the remaining Vidian forces, but this was his fight, his and Zorax's. In the end, it was Zorax's own arrogance that proved his undoing. As Edward lay battered and bleeding, the Vidian towering over him, Zorax hesitated, a final gloat, a moment of triumph before the killing blow. And in that moment, Edward saw his chance. He goaded Zorax, taunting him, playing to his ego. "Your perfect being," Edward spat blood, struggling to one knee. "Prove it. Let's see this ultimate creation of yours, or are you afraid it's not as perfect as you think?" Zorax's eyes blazed with madness and pride. With a roar he turned to the pulsing heart of the facility, preparing to unleash his final horror upon the world. And as he did, Edward surged to his feet, a hidden knife in his hand. He buried it to the hilt in Zorax's back, twisting savagely. The Vidian scientist howled, staggering. His creation, half unleashed, turned on him, a nightmare of grasping tentacles and snapping jaws. Edward grabbed his rifle and ran, bellowing for his team to evacuate. They fled as the facility collapsed around them, the dying screams of Zorax and his creation echoing in their ears. They barely made it out before the entire structure imploded, burying the horrors beneath a mountain of rubble. Edward and his team staggered clear, battered and bloody, but alive. It was over. The Vidian threat was ended. But as Edward looked out over the shattered remains of the city, he felt no triumph, only a bone-deep weariness. Earth was free, but the cost had been so high, friends lost, cities ruined, a world forever changed by the scars of war. Edward let his rifle fall from numb fingers. The soldier in him knew that there were still battles to fight, a world to rebuild. But for now, in this moment, all he felt was the weight of it all, the burden of being the one to survive when so many had not. He turned to his team, these few battered survivors. They looked to him, their leader, their rock through the long nightmare. He saw his own exhaustion reflected in their eyes, but also a grim determination, a flicker of hope. "Let's go home," Edward said hoarsely. "Let's find out what home means now." They walked into the ruined city, picking their way through the rubble. Around them, other survivors began to emerge, blinking in the dusty light, the remnants of humanity, ready to start anew. The war was over. The rebuilding had just begun. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.